As many regular viewers will be aware, the West Ham Voice is very much a one-man show. I do all the content, and I do this channel for the love of talking about West Ham, and I do try to offer as much different content as I can. But with work, life, and football balance to juggle, I can't always get content out on a regular daily basis. I do try, but moving home this week will enable me to start doing the live shows again. The West Ham Weekly will definitely be back on Monday nights very soon. And the Friday late night shows will also be back, probably not as regularly, but maybe once or twice a month. So do look out for the details of those. But if it's the first time that you're watching the West Ham Voice, or if you've watched me before, please do click on the QR code that's about to appear in the corner. Once you click on that, you can go straight to the subscribe page, and subscription is free of charge to show your appreciation of the content. If you really want to show your appreciation, you can hit the like button after the show as well. There's also a hype button that's below the video. If you click on that, it allows other viewers to watch this video too, so you're kind of promoting it on my behalf. And if you're feeling extremely generous around this Christmas time, you can become a member of the West Ham Voice for $1.99 a month. Members do receive some extra content, not a lot, but some additional content. And all the money that's raised through the membership scheme goes directly to Prostate Cancer UK. And so far to date, myself and the members have raised well over £400. So thank you for that. Right, let's try and catch up on the latest transfer news. And this time, we're going to focus on players apparently leaving West Ham when the January window opens. So let's start with George Earthy. I'm sure you all saw the story on Tuesday that he's apparently going to be sold in the upcoming January transfer window. Now, since then, the story has somewhat been kind of changed. Now, basically, what's happened is it's quite simple, really, and we've seen it happening before. As it stands, George Earthy's contract is coming to an end when this season is over. Now, unlike other academy players of recently, Earthy has yet to agree a contract extension, and the club does have the right to automatically renew his contract, I think, by a further year. The desire seems to be to keep George Earthy at West Ham, but West Ham don't want to get their fingers burnt in the same way as has happened with previous academy players. If you recall, one of the most recent players, Divine Mbama, held out on a contract renewal, didn't sign a renewal, even though a contract was on the table for well over a year or so. And he's the prime example. So in Mbama's case, the offer was on the table for him and his agent to sign. They weren't happy with it. The contract ran out. Mbama left on a free. He went to Man City. And George Earthy at this moment in time is in the same kind of position. If a new deal can't be agreed, what West Ham are likely to do is they're likely to trigger the extension on his contract and then hopefully negotiate with the player again in the summer. It kind of makes business sense, doesn't it? How many times have West Ham been accused of either agreeing poor contracts with players or allowing players' contracts to run down and then they leave for nothing? Both scenarios inevitably result in West Ham losing out financially. But then I look at the footballing side of things when it comes to George Earthy, and I do have to ask the question whether he is good enough for the first team selection. Since Nuno's arrival, he's called up a number of players from the academy, and they've all been given their chance. Ezra Myers in defence, Freddie Potts, Mohamedou Kante in midfield. And even though he hasn't developed through the academy, Luis Guilherme has also been given a chance. So far, apart from Guilherme, these young players, Ezra Myers, Freddie Potts, Kante, etc., don't really seem to have let Nuno down. They've all shown some level of aptitude for the Premier League. So why has Earthy not been afforded the same chance? Well, he's been on the bench a couple of times this season, but he's not made it from the bench to the pitch. So perhaps that's Oliver. Say hello, Oliver. Where is he? There. That's Oliver, the black cat. Why has Earthy not been afforded the same chance? Like I said, he's been on the bench a few times, but he's not made it from bench to pitch. Perhaps Nuno hasn't felt that the games were right to use him in, or perhaps Nuno thinks that Earthy just doesn't have quite what it takes to deliver on the pitch itself. Look, I'm really torn over Earthy. If you asked me about him a few years ago, I would have said that he would absolutely make it into the senior squad on a regular basis. But injuries have put pay to him having a consistent run in the team. And let's not forget, Earthy has only recently returned from his latest injury setback. Now, fans have been asking, could he be any worse than bringing on the likes of Rodriguez? Well, that's a little unfair as they kind of play in different positions in midfield. You know, when Rodriguez has been called upon, it's because Nuno's wanted to have a more experienced, passer of the ball, someone who can control the midfield. That's not what Earthy does. Look, I'm not making an excuse to keep Rodriguez. I am the first to believe that he actually needs to leave the club. But is Earthy really the answer to our attacking needs? I just don't know. Look, one thing that we do is we do this an awful lot of West Ham United. I don't know if other clubs do the same thing with their fan base, but we laud all our players. We make them out to be the best thing since sliced bread. We demand that they become part of the first team, etc. But not many, if any, have made it. I mean, Josh, his name's gone. Plays for Burnley. He's kind of made it into the Premier League, but there aren't that many others. There was a defender that we had who played for Luton when they were in the Premier League as well. But when you look on the whole, our academy players are good, but they're good when they're in the academy playing against academy teams. When it comes to them making it into the first team, into the senior team, I'm not so sure. Look, from what I understand, we're trying to negotiate a new deal with George Earthy. That hasn't happened yet. If this continues, we're likely to trigger the automatic clause, as I've said, to extend his contract for one more year. And then, as I've said, we'll either try to negotiate a new deal with him in the summer, or we'll have no choice but to sell him. Rather get something rather than nothing for him. But I'm not so sure it's going to happen in January. I guess, we'll wait to see. But my feeling is he'll still be here when the window closes. Maybe the alternative is he might be loaned out. That won't hurt him. If he's loaned out for the rest of the season, that won't necessarily be such a bad thing. Right, let's move on to other players, because on Tuesday I did a video talking about Niclas Füllkrug, and I gave you an update there. And from what we keep hearing, AC Milan are very close to signing the German, giving him a way out of West Ham, and he will be more or less taken for cover for their striker, Santiago Jimenez, who is having an ankle or has had or is having ankle surgery. So he's going to be out for a little while, and Fullkrug is going to be makeshift. He's going to be, a filler in a way. Let's not kid ourselves, people. Fullkrug to AC Milan is not for the long term. They're after a player, a loan. That's why they want an option to buy rather than an obligation, to ensure that they do have that short-term fix until Jimenez returns to action. And that could be sooner rather than later. It certainly won't be within the next month or so. So Fullkrug may get a little run out. But don't expect Fullkrug to be at AC Milan for the long term. Might get a couple of starts. And then once Jimenez is back, he'll be a bench warmer until the end of the season. And unless he becomes an absolute sensation at the Italian club, Fullkrug will be back at West Ham for the 26-27 pre-season training. Now, the benefits for West Ham, I guess his salary comes off our wage bill, which saves us, £2.3 million for the half a season. And it also opens up a place in the squad for us to get in another striker. And we have been linked to several strikers over the past few weeks. So for those two reasons alone, it's good for West Ham. But as I said, this ain't going to be long-term. It's likely to be very, very short-term. Right. What about Luis Guilherme? Now, I don't understand some sections of our fan base. Some have been saying for a while that Guilherme is just not good enough and he's been a waste of money. Then others argue that he hasn't actually been given a real chance to show what he can do because he hasn't been put in his natural position out on the right. Now, for me, an attacking midfielder should be able to show some level of acumen, whether he plays on the right, on the left, or in the middle. How many times do we hear that a player should be able to adapt, in any attacking position? And I'm not so sure Guilherme has shown that, to be honest. Look, And is he going to get an opportunity to play out on the right? I doubt it very much, because unless Jarrod Bowen gets injured, Guilherme isn't going to get that chance. Look, his appearances so far in the senior side have been somewhat underwhelming. There doesn't seem to be the impetus there to suggest he really is going to break through. I know he's still young, and I know you will argue back at me that, whilst he's not playing in his natural position, then there's no chance. But I don't know. Sometimes you see in a player whether they've got that, they've got something about them to actually make them successful. I'm not so sure Guilherme's that. So is he for sale? Well, it all depends on how desperate we are to bring money in to fund player purchases. Ironically, Guilherme may be one of the players that we actually might get a decent fee for. Not what we paid for him, but certainly a large chunk of it. So I guess we'll have to see what happens there. Next up, there's a lot of confusion whether we're going to move or either Guido Rodriguez or Andrew Irving in January, or whether we're going to keep them. It won't surprise me if they both go. It won't surprise me if they both stay. They've been both, in and out of Nuno's team over the past couple of months since Nuno's arrival. So it's hard to gauge whether he really thinks that they can offer something, or whether he feels that he has other choices available to him. I mean, we've seen Mohamedou Kante coming into the team quite regularly. So who knows? Maybe he will get more of a shout than Andy Irving, for example. We've had constant talk of there being interest in Rodriguez from teams in South America and Spain. Whilst the player continues to earn a very decent wage at West Ham, which can't be matched abroad, then I can't see him leaving till the end of this season. Maybe he'll go in January, but it won't surprise me if he doesn't. And then as for Irving, he's been linked to clubs primarily in Europe and Scotland. And I think, we do not need both players. If one goes, I think that won't be a bad thing. And if one has to go, then I'd rather it be Rodriguez than Andrew Irving. And then finally, James Ward-Prowse. There's suggestions that he's certainly returning to Southampton. Now, Southampton is sitting mid-table in the Championship, but not that far away in points away from the playoff places. However, they're not going to be able to afford James Ward-Prowse's salary. He's on 115 grand a week, as we kind of all know. So for a mid-table team who might be pushing for a playoff place, he could actually do a really, really good job for them. But his wages are going to be a problem. Now, they're going to want to bring him on loan, maybe on loan with an obligation to buy if they get promoted to the Premier League, something like that. But what West Ham are almost certainly going to have to do, if they want him to move on, is we're going to have to part fund his wages for that to happen. Now, imagine the irony if James Ward-Prowse moves to Southampton, helps them through the playoffs to get back into the Premier League, and West Ham go the other way. All in all, whoever leaves West Ham this January is not going to generate an awful lot of money in transfer income. Fullkrug on loan, save us, 2 million, 2.3 million? If sold, George EARTHY will recoup, we get about $1 million for him, plus around saving of £400,000 in wages for the rest of this season. Guilherme, as mentioned, might get us something like 15 mil, plus a saving of about $1 million in wages. And if sold, Rodriguez might fetch 5 mil, plus a salary saving of just under 2 million. And if Irving was sold, maybe we get 3 or 4 million for him, and a saving of around 400,000. So that in total, best case scenario, will give us £30 million. Best case scenario. All of them going, recouping money in the transfers, recouping money in salaries, and so on and so forth. But then to loan out James Ward-Prowse to Southampton and part fund, let's say at least half his 115 grand a week, will set us back £1.5 million. So what does the balance of 28.5 million buy you in today's transfer market? Not a lot, really. Maybe, just maybe, 2 players for a modest fees and then salaries on top. Who knows? The board have said that they're going to back Nuno in this transfer window. Let's hope they do that. And let's hope that they're not waiting or relying on generating funds through the sale of players in order to do that. Because if they are, I fear that we're not going to get an awful lot back for our money. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Do leave your thoughts. Who would you like to see stay? Do you think any of the players I've mentioned should actually stay at West Ham? Do you think they can help us throughout the rest of the season? Or do you think they should go? I will come back with another show talking about the players that we've been linked to. I did a couple of shows recently about players we're linked to, but I'll come back about the latest ones. You know, there's all talk about, you know, which strikers, which American striker do we want? You know, out of Josh Sargent and Haji Wright, you know, from Coventry and Norwich City, respectively. You know, a lot of people don't have a lot of time for Sargent, but maybe he might be just the sort of player we need at West Ham. We need someone to bang the goals in. Could it be him? Who knows? Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Leave your comments, become a subscriber, and I'll see you all soon.